So we need support from all fronts, everywhere, particularly multinationals like IFPRI. Our government is investing a large amount of its scarce resources in the field of agriculture. Agriculture is here. He will throw more light on this particular issue. All I wanted to say is that agriculture, climate change, food, these are very basic issues of concern to entire humanity, particularly to us who are located in a very vulnerable region and who don't have much assets living as a developing nation. We don't have very spare resources to spend more on this field. Although I can assure you that our government has continuously given more importance to research and development. Our institutions in this area, BARC and BRE, etc., are working hard. We have reaped benefit from their hard work in the recent years, and will continue to put in more efforts and more investments in this particular area. So, ladies and gentlemen, having said that, I would like to once again assure you that Bangladesh is poised to cooperate with all countries in the region and beyond in all matters of common interest to all of us and to humanity at large. And food remains the very basic requirements for all of us. So in that light, IFPRI's work and others, including BIMSTEC and SAARC and others beyond, their work is very much needed, and our government will continue to provide full-time support for their contribution in this area. I would also like to thank for the presentation of keynote paper by Dr. Johan Swinen, Director General of IFPRI, and by Dr. Aditya Mukherjee, focusing on South Asian region. Having said that, and thanking my friends from the media who are present here and others who have joined this very important event, I would like to thank all of you and end by thanking once again IFPRI for their hospitality. Thank you. Joy Bangla. Joy Bangabandhu.
Thank you, sir. I would now like to invite the chair for this session, Mr. Mohammad Saidul Islam, Secretary, Ministry of Agriculture, to give his remarks.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Honorable Chief Guest of today's August gathering, Mr. Muhammad Abdul Mannan, MP, Honorable Minister, Ministry of Planning, the Government of Bangladesh. His Excellency Mr. Tenzin Lekpil, Secretary General of BIMSTEC, that is Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multi-Sectoral Technical and Economic Cooperation. My colleague, Mr. Jamaluddin Ahmed, Director, SAARC Secretariat. Dr. Shahidur Rashid, Director of South Asia International Food Policy Research Institute. Distinguished guests sitting in front of me, the August gathering. The member of the journalist, the ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum, and good afternoon to everybody. It's a great pleasure for me to be present in this very, very important launch ceremony of the Global Food Policy launching ceremony of International Food Policy Research Institute. I'm very thankful to the organizers for inviting me in this very, very important meeting. You know, Bangladesh was predominantly the food deficit country once. But with the insightful thinking of our father of the nation, I must pay tribute, the highest respect to him. He initiated the Green Revolution of Bangladesh. He always believed that the economic development of Bangladesh depends mainly on the development of agriculture And to do that, modern agriculture must be in place. Actually, the first budget of Bangabandhu government in 1972, out of the total development budget, 1/5 was allocated to the agriculture sector. So this is very important. And he introduced modern varieties of crops, and modern irrigation system, and also different mechanization also he introduced, and irrigation and other system in place, so that we can grow our food. And following his path of development of agriculture, our present Prime Minister, the daughter of the father of the nation, under his leadership, the first time Bangladesh, the food deficit country, could be the self-sufficient country, especially in the rice, in the grain rice. And not only in rice, I can give you few examples in other crops as well. For example, the maize. In 2005 and 6, our total maize production was only 0.5 million metric ton. Now, we are producing more than 5.5 million metric ton. You can see the 11 times growth production in maize during these 15, 17 years. Not only grains or cereals, Bangladesh did excellently well in other areas. For example, vegetable productions. We are the global third ranking in the global position of producing vegetables. I can give you another statistics. In 2008 and 9, the vegetable production of Bangladesh was 2.9 million metric ton. Now, the vegetable production of Bangladesh is more than 20 million metric ton. More than almost 7 times increase of vegetable production. So, the mandate of the government and especially the Ministry of Agriculture to ensure the food security and nutritional security. We not only ensure our cereal consumptions requirement, but as well as the nutritional aspects also. But despite all this development, we know that we are tremendously facing new problems, especially from the change in the climate. As mentioned by others, Bangladesh is one of the most vulnerable countries. Although we are not the emitters, but we are the sufferers. We are the worst victim of climate changes. And our Prime Minister, Honorable Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, is currently the chair of the Forum of the Climate Victim Countries. And she is working for the development and the resilient activities for these countries. So climate is always very important to our agricultural production. We just been informed the IFPRI's global report on, and that is related to climate change and food system. I'm very, very thankful to IFPRI about their recommendations part. They mentioned about the research and development and mentioned that if we can put $1 or taka, we can be benefited 30 times out of that one. It's very, very important things. And that's why I can give you one example how Bangladesh government is actually working in this line. Despite this COVID situation and the world recessions, the community are facing, Bangladesh is not out of that. We are also facing seriously, although we are not anyway related to this war between Ukraine and Russia, but we are suffering a lot. And I can tell you how the government of Bangladesh is committed to agriculture. During the COVID period, the budget of agriculture ministry was not touched, even it was increased. Although we have to compromise in other sectors. But the government is so committed that we cannot compromise with the production of our food crops. This year, the government has increased 50 times budget of the Ministry of Agriculture. I can tell you, give the statistics. Other than the subsidy, the last year, the subsidy was 7,000, more than 500,000 crore taka. But this year we paid actually 28,000 crore taka. It's almost 4 times. Despite, and in addition to these subsidies, the budget of the Ministry of Agriculture was 1,600,000 taka, 16,000 crore taka. 16,000 crore taka. This year it is 24,000 crore taka, sir. It's just 50% increase. So government is investing on it, and very much our Honorable Prime Minister has clearly indicated in all his address towards the nation that not a single inches of land can be kept fallow. So we have to increase the production always. And the Ministry of Agriculture actually following the guidance of Honorable Prime Minister, and we are working on it. Thankful to the keynote presenters, the report presenters, Dr. Joan Swinen, Director General, International Food Policy Research, and also Dr. Aditi Mukherjee, especially focusing on the South Asia part. And many of these actually, and she, especially Dr. Mukherjee, she focuses about the Bangladesh part. I can give you the strategies our government are taking at this moment. We are in the process of transforming our agriculture from this subsistence agriculture to the modern agriculture, to making our agriculture a profitable venture, and use more mechanization and modern technologies and digital technology, and as well as others. Ministry of Agriculture is one of the few ministry in the government of Bangladesh who has actually, we have drafted our action plan for combating this fourth industrial revolution effects and others. So we are in line with the using research and innovation, as the success of agriculture in the last 50 years is the research and innovation, investing more on research part as well as the extension of our technologies. And our government is also investing on this as well, and will be continuing. And we are actually identified few thematic areas where the investment of agriculture could be very, very important. Research and development is one of the area. The other areas are irrigation, as mentioned in IFPRI reports, is very, very important. So that we can, water is a very precious element for agriculture production. So we are working how we can improve the water use efficiency. As well as we are working on the value chain system, the storage facilities, reducing the post-harvest loss and others. Actually, all the areas mentioned by IFPRI. So thankful to IFPRI for this such and wonderful documents, and I think that it will help us in our policy documents and formulating our policy in future as well. So thank you very much once again, August gatherings, and especially the IFPRI and our honorable chief guest for making this this gathering a very successful one. Thank you once again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Islam. With this, we conclude our inaugural session. We will now take a short tea break and resume the session at 5:10. If you would like to avail a copy of the report, we have a standee outside the hall. You can scan the QR code and download the report. Please note that it might take a while to download as it's a large file. So we will resume our session at 5:10 p.m. That's 5:10 p.m. Thank you. Distinguished guests, we are close to 10 past 5. I would now like to request the guests to return to the hall.
এরা এরকম ধরছে ব্লক করে রাখলে কে ঢুকবে?
Distinguished guests, I would now like to request the guests to return to the hall. We'll be beginning shortly. Thank you. I would now like to request the guests to return to the hall. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. We will now move to the plenary session titled Perspectives on Climate Change and Food Systems in Bangladesh. For this session, we have Dr. Selimul Haq, Director, International Center for Climate Change and Development, ICCCAD, who will be moderating the session today. He will pose questions and comments to the panelists and ask them to share their perspective. I would now like to invite Dr. Selimul Haq, Director, International Center for Climate Change and Development, ICCCAD, to the dais. For the panel discussion, I would like to invite Dr. Duncan Overfield, Deputy Development Director, Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, FCDO, British High Commission, to join us on the dais. I would now like to invite Dr. Hossein Zillur Rahman, Executive Chairman, Power and Participation Research Center, PPRC, to join us on the dais. I would now like to invite Dr. Purvi Mehta, Head Agriculture for Asia and Lead Global Climate Adaptation, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, BMGF, to join us on the dais. I would now like to invite Mr. Kamrul Islam Chaudhary, Chairman, Asia Pacific Forum of Environmental Journalists, to join us on the dais. Thank you all for joining us today. Over to you, Dr. Hawk.
Thank you very much, and good evening. Assalamu alaikum to everybody. It's my pleasure to be moderating this session. We're a bit late, but I'm sure we'll be able to have a good discussion going forward. You've just heard the names and affiliations of our very distinguished panelists. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give each of them the floor initially for about 5 minutes to share their perspectives on where do we go from here. We've had a very interesting inaugural session where we heard about this very interesting new report that the IFPRI have produced on global food systems, and in particular, the connection between climate change and food systems, agriculture, plus beyond agriculture as well. So I'm going to start by inviting Duncan on my left, who has a lot of experience in the South Asian region. He's recently come to Dhaka, Bangladesh FCD office to share a little bit about his views on where South Asia as a region might be able to take forward this twin track approach of enhancing food systems, improving food systems, while tackling climate change at the same time. Duncan?
Thank you. Good evening and Assalamu alaikum, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here this evening to sort of represent sort of like the UK government in Bangladesh. Thank you. I'm feeling slightly nervous with such a sort of distinguished panel sort of like here, but I'll do my best and I'll try to keep to 5 minutes. So I think the first thing I'd say, I mean, I think it's really important just looking at the launch of this report. I think the transformation of the global food system is one of the most significant challenges facing the entire global community. I think, you know, we see the current context, very high prices around the world, driven by many, many factors, and the spotlight on food and sort of broader nutrition security is very, very high at the moment. I think we can probably all see this, how fragile the global and regional supplies of food actually are, and that, you know, this report couldn't be more timely than it's coming at the moment. I think climate change, rising and changing demand patterns and resource scarcity present just massive challenges to agricultural production and the whole food system. It does require very difficult trade-offs between raising productivity, building climate change resilience, and protecting environmental resources. to be addressed by all of us and at all types of different levels. I mean, within the Bangladesh context, and I am just a very new arrival here, I have been working in the region for a while, but it seems that, you know, Bangladesh, it has huge opportunity and huge challenges facing it. You look at Bangladesh's sort of history from 1971, and it's very clear that agriculture has been one of the major drivers of economic growth and poverty reduction. And it still is very, very important in macro terms. It still represents 13% of GDP and it employs over 40% of the labour force. It couldn't be, you know, the issues around it couldn't be more important. Further progress in agriculture is going to remain critical, not just in agriculture, but it's the entire non-farm rural economy. And it is particularly those sectors that are particularly important to sort of what happens to Bangladesh in the future. I mean, I think we've seen comments that I've made so far have been a little bit too much on the supply side. I mean, on the demand side, we do just see that demand patterns are changing. They're changing within Bangladesh, they're changing within the region, they're changing globally. Bangladesh does reflect some of those broader changes. Cereal intake is declining and demand for dense foods is actually increasing, and that creates whole sets of demands on systems. One of the things I didn't see too much in the report, and I'll just mention a little bit, obviously the private sector within Bangladesh is very heavily involved in making significant investments. And of course, quite often they're at the forefront of taking risks and moving forward. And their involvement in the agri-food sector, in strengthening supply chains to meet growing demand is absolutely critical. There's this investment going here. Bangladesh has made great performance, but what Bangladesh does see is declining trade deficit in agricultural products. Imports have tripled recently, sort of in the last few years, and exports have actually declined slightly during that period. And there are just very significant issues related to compliance with international food quality and sort of like safety standards. And there are also big issues around sort of overall cost competitiveness as well, and particularly comments that were being made by the Secretary and the Minister basically about modernising agriculture, quite critical, that the issues around cost competitiveness. Now that cost competitiveness is driven by quite a lot of different things. It is determined by the costs of trade. I think everybody probably knows that the costs of trade within South Asia are very, very high. And they're also just changing patterns of comparative advantage around the world, which is sort of allowing Bangladesh to compete quite well in some parts of the sector, not so well in some of the others. I've mentioned a little bit about sort of the high costs within South Asia. I think, you know, certainly my view, I mean, I should actually say I am an agricultural economist by background. It's been quite a while since I've worked in that area. But there are things are being driven very, very much by these high costs in South Asia. It is actually sort of undermining the ability, particularly of the region, to sort of to make the most of its comparative advantage. And there are a number of things that do need to be addressed. Maybe we can talk about this perhaps in the next round, but I mean, I would just quickly highlight, certainly in terms of improving infrastructure, reducing red tape, generally improving the overall policy environment in terms of sort of regional cooperation and integration are all going to be key for the next few years. Climate change is, as we were reminded, has happened, it is happening, and it will continue to happen. A lot of the simulations sort of related to Bangladesh do make very sort of like stark reading. There is an expectation that you know, wheat and rice production will go down. The yields of sort of the high yielding varieties of rice in particular will be significantly hit by rising sort of soil and water salinity. And we of course need to keep in mind that, you know, the sector as well is responsible for 40% of Bangladesh's greenhouse gas emissions. And so it's part of the solution. It's also part of the problem, all at the same time as we all are. I mean, the sort of changing demand patterns, sort of like looking at it, definitely implies that there will be an increase in imports to ensure sort of like food and broader nutrition security. And the interventions are going to need to sort of focus on a number of different areas sort of to address this. There are issues relating sort of to the basic resilience. Temperatures are increasing, rainfall patterns are changing, they're becoming much less predictable, and there are a whole set of issues around sort of extreme weather events, which are becoming more frequent and also less predictable as well. So there's a whole set of things around that. The United Kingdom is very interested in what we can do in terms of sort of helping sort of Bangladesh to use effect trade, basically to take advantage of the comparative advantage in the sector and make sort of efficient and effective choices on crops, different varieties to be used. And basically just to meet not just issues that are going on within Bangladesh, but also going within the region and in the world, and to ensure that Bangladesh sort of gains the most from that. So, I mean, I think I'll just finish just four quick things in terms of what the UK government's going to be doing. The first thing is we are going to be delivering a new climate and environment programme in Bangladesh, which has a large ecosystem-based adaptation approach included. We're including components on smart agriculture, so that's going to be a very important part of our programming. We're also working with our regional colleagues and partners to address issues of high inter-regional trade costs, supply chain resilience and broader regional cooperation across the region. And we are going to be providing sort of central support through our colleagues in the United Kingdom to the broad and what is the critical CGIAR system. That support will continue, absolutely critical. And then perhaps the last thing to note is that you will have seen all the press releases yesterday, but the United Kingdom has opened a new developing country trading scheme, which will allow Bangladesh and 65 other countries a continuing duty-free access to the UK market. And for Bangladesh, that will be sort of a very sort of like high level. Certainly that support will last up until the end of the current decade, yeah. So I'll just finish. I'd just like to congratulate IFPRI so on the very timely publication of this report, which is a big part of pushing us all to do the things that we need to do going forward. Just like I'll hand back to our esteemed moderator and chair and say thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Duncan, for that extremely useful intervention. I'll come back to you again with a question or two. But now let me invite Dr. Purvi Mehta from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We know that Bill and Melinda Gates have had a long interest in agriculture and food, particularly in Africa. Could you tell us a little bit at the global level, and then also what you're planning to do in the South Asia region and in Bangladesh as well?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and really good to be here. I have to congratulate Shahid again. I had an opportunity to do so at the very similar event he had led in Delhi a couple of weeks ago. So I think in the IFPRI global report launch, I'm becoming a common denominator. So thank you for that. This is a report that we all look forward to. And say, for example, the report and the thorough analysis on nutrition last year. COVID-related challenges was last year, and this year is on climate. So I think this is really very, very important document, not just for bringing that cognizance, but also having those robust data and evidences, which can also become very important policy tools. So congratulations to IFPRI again. Mr. Chairman, to answer your question about the Gates Foundation, in this region, we have been investing since 2007. And in fact, while our very intentional work in climate is considered to be quite new, and the new climate adaptation portfolio that was formed has been recently formed. In this region, the first investment the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation did in agriculture actually can be categorized as climate adaptation because this was on the salinity tolerance or abiotic stress tolerance rice varieties. And so I think climate is going to be very important. We, as you know, we work on 4 fundamental strategic goals. One is productivity in agriculture, one is farmers' income, third is nutrition, and fourth is gender in agriculture. And when we look at any of these issues, and if one wants to make any changes in any of these issues, without working on climate and especially climate adaptation, one cannot go anywhere. And that's so true for the world, right? I mean, if we see from the world productivity actually has doubled, right? But the productivity could have been 20% higher if it wasn't for the climate related factors. And so climate plays a very important role, but not just ecologically, but also from an economic angle. And I think there is so much more data and so much more research to be done on that. We now have a lot of data on the impact of climate change on production and productivity in crop and livestock. We don't have enough data on the direct impact of climate on farmers' income. We don't have a lot of data on direct impact of climate change on nutrition, for example. So there are several questions that needs to be that remain unanswered. But one of the fundamental thing I really like about this report for the region and globally is this is one of the very few reports which doesn't only focus on diagnosing the problem, but it talks about solutions. And also it doesn't talk about climate as a challenge that we are going to face in the future, but it talks about the challenges that are already there and how do we really solve that. So the whole approach of talking about a cross section of issues such as from gene editing to social protection to production systems to how do we use the digital infrastructure into that, I think that's what is very important. And we will our strategy will continue to be influenced by the data that IFPRI has generated.
Thank you very much, Purvi, for that. And it's very good to know that you will be continuing to focus on this issue in our region going forward. I'm now going to turn to Kamrul Islam Chaudhry, who has a long history of representing Bangladesh and the least developed countries in the global negotiations on climate change, and recently was in Petersburg, Germany for a high-level discussion hosted by the government of Germany, where the president of Egypt, who are going to be hosting COP27, were also there. Kamrul, I'd like you to tell us a little bit about how agriculture and food is playing a role in the climate change negotiations. As you know, there's been a lot of discussion about it, but it's not a formal agenda item, but it is an informal agenda item where last year in COP26, there was a day for agriculture and food. This year in COP27, the Egyptian government have also declared a special day for agriculture and food. And these days are becoming, in my view, very important days where actors who are doing things can come together and share what they're doing, as opposed to the negotiators who are negotiating all the time on details that are very difficult for other people to understand. So you have a long history of following this. Perhaps you can just share with us where you think agriculture and food is playing a role in the UNFCCC process.
Thank you for asking this question, especially food and agriculture. It has been a taboo for quite a long in UNFCCC negotiations. And some of the parties, especially developed country parties, even some developing countries parties, especially the fast-moving countries, they are reluctant to address the issue of agriculture and also nutrition in the discussion of climate change parlays. Essentially because they are concerned about the methane and other issues. And since they are at the say earlier stage of development, they would like to see it as a hindrance for fast development. So they are very reluctant in taking it as an issue in climate parlance. But since I think Milan COP, this issue came off and on. And last year at Glasgow, it was high on the agenda, especially at the high level, at the Leaders Summit, where our head of states and governments, they participated. So from last year, it has loss and damage negotiation, say those issues came on the forefront. This year, in SB session in May, June, in Bonn, it has also figured quite high. And also at ministerial, it came. So hopefully at Sharm el Sheikh, come November, it will be not only a day specific for agriculture and food, nutrition, but also in negotiation for more than 2 weeks, it will be discussed. But my take would be, especially on, say, IPCC AR6 report, it was quite loud and clear that soft limits of adaptation has been exhausted. And also hard limit is approaching fast. Because we have already been at 1.1 degree rise, temperature rise. So if we want to keep alive 1.5 degree global goal of Paris Agreement, then our hard limit for adaptation is only 0.4. So we have to be very careful about our not only agriculture, food production, food systems, forestry, but also it has implication, especially agriculture or food system has an entry point in terms of water. Water security is also endangered. Then also come of food security, livelihood security, our securities in terms of health, and also, say, energy security. Because for food systems, we need lot of energies. But if we don't go for renewable energies, then our emission level from agriculture, from our food system is bound to short. So we need to, say, put a cap over there, say, carbon market, which is a new mechanism, market mechanism, and non-market mechanism should play a role in the future. And as IFPRI, this report came up with the, say, estimation that $1 invested in research innovation have a return of $30. That should trigger our policymakers to take bold steps, courageous steps to invest in, say, food system, in agriculture, because that will give our agriculturists, our farmers, more resilience, more adaptive capacities. That capacities now need to be, say, covered. And also there are, as IPCC AR6 report said, that there are trillions of dollars finance gap, even for adaptation. So how it's a huge, huge challenge to cover that trillions of dollars finance gap. So in South Asia, we are also facing that bottleneck, resource constraints. So how to face this challenge of covering this huge adaptation finance gap? Then we need to have a proper adaptation planning. And that was why we launched, Bangladesh proposed at Copenhagen in 2009 that every least developed country should have national adaptation plan. And that process, even in Bangladesh, we have started, but that is yet to be, say, finalized. Hopefully, that will give some boost, especially raising our capacities to implement adaptation plan, adaptation actions onto the ground. And agriculture, food system is the main entry point over there. And that requires lot of finance, lot of investment for innovations, research, because we are in South Asia very shy about funding R&D, funding research, innovations, empirical studies. When we were students, we used to have, say, our professors used to conduct a lot of empirical studies. But nowadays, we don't find that, say, 30 years, 40 years research experience, especially our legendary professor, say, Nurul Islam. He at IFPRI, after leaving planning commission, first planning commission in 1974, he joined IFPRI and tried to convince our policymakers to pursue in investment in R&D. Our professor, another professor, Musharraf Hussain, who used to work for food and nutrition, lot of groundbreaking research work he conducted. Even Dr. Hussein Jillur, in 80s, he introduced the incidence of poverty, nutrition, in those days, in late 80s and early 90s. But those empirical studies, long-term studies, that now we need to pursue. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Kamrul. Zillur, can I turn to you next? I'd like you to talk a little bit more about the other side of the coin, which is food and consumption, and particularly of the poor people. And in particular, you've been doing some very interesting work on the new poor after the COVID impacts. How is it affecting consumption of food, access to food, in the context of both climate impacts as well as the COVID pandemic? And what do you think we should be doing about that in Bangladesh?
Thank you. I join others in congratulating IFPRI for this report launch and this occasion for discussing issues which affects us all. To start with your question first is that COVID impact has magnified the vulnerabilities of climate change in multiple ways. And one of the risks that I see now newly emerging in the context of Bangladesh, and I'm sure around countries like Bangladesh around the world, and even in rich countries where there are now growing numbers of poor in certain segments of society. I mean, SDG, I see Bangladesh at a serious risk of becoming off track on a key SDG target, which is nutrition. We have seen one of the adjustments people are having to make. Nutrition has become one of the key adjustment template on which the lives of millions are being now renegotiated. And that requires us to really
not just see it as an economic phenomena, it's a critical risk that may become off track. Bangladesh was well in terms of purely carbohydrate-based diet to a more nutritious diet. There is a serious risk of that being reversed. So this reversal risk is like a dramatic expression of what happens in terms of this planetary phenomena like climate change and COVID-19. So that really should concentrate minds in terms of how we need to approach this issue. But addressing the bigger issue of the session itself, climate change and food systems, I want to introduce a sort of I think it's critical to also look at these issues introduce a social lens here also. It's critical. For example, one of the questions which is not being asked yet, the whole phase of the Green Revolution, last 20, 30, 40 years, when at the early stages of the Green Revolution 1.0, there was a fear that the small peasantry would disappear, etc. Well, they didn't. They brilliantly managed to find a space for themselves and actually drove the productivity increase, and that also contributed to poverty reduction because they were the beneficiaries. But there is now a real, both a research and a policy question, which is not being asked yet, but I think we need to ask it right now. What is going to be the fate of the small peasantry in the coming decades? Because in the rural areas, some of the trends that we are looking at forces us to prioritize that question. And I would connect that to Kamrul's point that yes, somehow there is a need, even myself as a researcher, recently I felt, we were into rural research, we moved into urban macro research, global research, etc. But I feel, going around Bangladesh, that the rural scene is a newly transformed scene, which is not understood well enough. So the new rural is a new research challenge. What does it mean? You can't, the binary of agriculture and non-agriculture, small farmer and large farmers, these binaries are no longer the effective analytical categories by which to understand the changes which are happening. So there is a huge research challenge here of understanding this new rural, where part of the urban has intruded into the rural. I mean, rural in the sense that we thought about rural 30 years ago is no longer that rural. Urban is also in the rural, but in what sense? We really need to understand those issues. So I think this is something that I would like to highlight. And two other points, and I'll finish. One is about, I don't know, I must admit I didn't have a chance to go through the report fully, but there's a whole issue about the behavioral space on which we have to act. Food, consumption habits, approaches to food. We have to even reimagine food, even in terms of, water security was mentioned. But the issue is not just about water security, but it's about more responsible use of water. Bangladesh is one of the most profligate in misuse of water for irrigation. We don't harvest rainwater sufficiently. So this behavioral part, I think, has to become a critical research and also a policy issue. Final 2 points. One is that climate change. I talk from here, a bit of being an outsider here, in the sense that I haven't traveled with Kamrul to all these conferences, but I see a challenge of a stronger micro-macro connection in terms of how the agenda is being formulated and being understood across society. There is a lot of variation within, even with a small country like Bangladesh. So the macro evidence on climate change, I want to pose that question. Is there a challenge of marshalling that evidence to transform it into knowledge? I see a macro-micro disconnect in the overall. I mean, this maybe I may be, going against everyone here, but I see not a disconnect. I see a greater opportunity for a better connection between the macro evidence and the macro discourse. That connection, I think, needs to be done. Final point is we talk of policy, of course, but I think we also see a situation where the policymakers' approach to agriculture, I mean, I focus here only on agriculture and food systems. That is also an issue which needs to be thought about, because at the end of the day, the food systems cannot just be the source of food security. Food systems are also critical livelihood opportunities for millions of social entities. So there I see that we have a policy blind spot where we as policymakers, we have prioritized a narrow way of looking at agriculture as the primary source of food security, which is critical. But the people resident in the rural areas, the small farmers, etc., they are not content just to provide food security for the urban people. They are also want to be a participant in the overall growth and transformation process. How do you give them those opportunities? So you have to policy rethinking of agriculture itself, not just as a source of food security, but a driver of a new, more sustainable and responsible growth process, I think is one of the things we need to prioritize. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Dilur, for those excellent, provocative thoughts as well. What I'm going to do now is I will do another round of questions to our distinguished panelists, but then we'll open the floor up to anybody who wants to make comments or ask questions. There are a couple of floor mics, so when I open the floor, please go up to the microphone and I'll recognize you. But let me, before I do the second round of questions, just share a little bit of my own experience in this arena, which, as Zillur says, he's not a climate change person. I am a climate change person, working on climate change for many, many decades now. And I'm not a food and agriculture person. But I had a very interesting opportunity over the last couple of years when I was invited to join the preparation for the United Nations Food Systems Summit that was held last year. And the way this summit was organized, it was a very unusual summit in that it was not governments negotiating text. That is what we think of in various global agendas like the Framework Convention and the COPs. This was a multi-stakeholder approach where a number of international independent individuals were invited to chair 6 different action tracks, or 5 different action tracks, related to food systems. And the 5th of the 5 action tracks was on food resilience, food system resilience. And I was invited to chair that, or co-chair that. And I told them when they invited me that I don't know anything about food systems. I do climate change, but they said the resilience is about climate change and food systems. So your climate change experience will be relevant. And over the course of a year and a half, we did a huge number of consultations with governments, with experts, with youth, with entrepreneurs, with private sector, big private sector, small private sector, all over the world. It was an enormous consultative exercise through which I learned a hell of a lot. And at the end, there isn't one food system summit output. There's a series of commitments to take actions. And these actions have different coalitions of actors, governments, non-governments, private sector, civil society, etc., for each of these coalitions of actions that have come out of the summit. One of them is on food system and climate change. And in fact, every country is now developing what they're calling pathways for resilient food systems. And in Bangladesh, we are doing one for Bangladesh. In fact, there was a meeting earlier today, this morning, to discuss that, organized by the Ministry of Food, which is definitely a very positive development. But I just bring this up to share my own experience of what I learned out of that exercise was systems thinking, right? So as Ziller just said, it's not just agriculture, or even within agriculture, it's not just crops, it's not just, it's also livestock, it's also fisheries, it's also the whole chain of production to consumption. It's consumers, receivers of food, users of food. It's food safety, it's nutrition. There's a whole panoply of aspects associated with food systems, if you look at them as systems, which need to be looked at as systems. We just can't afford to slice them too narrowly into little pieces like we've been doing in the past. So the systems thinking is something that we need to think a little bit more about going forward. I'd like to now come to Duncan and ask you to expand a little bit on the point you made about what I would call suboptimal regional cooperation in South Asia on this. What do you attribute the barriers to, and what do you think we can do to meet them? And in a prompt to that, you saw in the inaugural session, 2 regional groups represented, SAARC and BIMSTEC, which are good initiatives within the countries in the region, but in my view, suboptimal in terms of actually getting the kind of regional cooperation and activities that we need. So are there things we can do to help them, to strengthen things? What's the thinking from your side on that?
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, so in my, I should say I have a heavy bias. In my previous job, this is what I spent a lot of my time working on. And we were very much looking at what were the barriers and what could we do to address basically issues of economic connectivity. And that covered all the sectors. It covered energy, it covered general trade, what were we going to do about transport sectors, etc. Yeah. But I mean, there are numerous barriers, but also huge numbers of opportunities here as well. And so when we start to talk about what is it that we need to do, I don't know, has anybody been through the Pt.4 border recently? No, just checking, just seeing if anybody's gone through that. I have, and I visited it like a few times. That actually tells you quite a lot about sort of, it's a microcosm of things that are sort of going on within the region. And what you find is that the infrastructure is just not enough to sort of to facilitate the flow of trade through between the 2 biggest countries in South Asia. It's the main commercial port. Lorries are taking an average about 9-10 days to sort of to go through. So it's a large piece of friction that stops trade taking place. Yeah. So some of it's to do with the infrastructure facilities. A lot of it is to do with procedures, of course, and the procedures that are there at the borders, the things that are required on both sides. And I would actually just point to, and those are things that can be addressed directly. There are a lot of the mechanisms are there. There's lots of cooperation, and it's an area where there's huge amounts of progress going on at the moment. Yeah, and Bangladesh and India are working very, very closely on sort of like smoothing some of that. Yeah, but there's a broader thing which is a bigger reflection for me, is that of course what can't happen is that vehicles can't just pass through the border, and that's to do with the general policy environment that exists. The fastest border in the world is the border between the United States and Canada, and it takes an average of 39 seconds to clear a truck. Yeah, and that's because everything is pre-cleared, and of course everything is basically integrated. It's checked basically before, as it leaves the depot, and it's checked at its final destination. It takes all the congestion away from the border. Those are the types of things that we kind of need to see happening. And of course, agricultural produce, a lot of it is highly perishable. Speed is very, very important. Moving things across the borders is actually like critical. I've been to a number of different borders around the region, and I think there's a lot for South Asia to learn from some of the borders in Southeast Asia, which were very similar, actually, probably like 30, 40 years ago. But what they've done is they've just jumped ahead in the use of technology, the policy environment, and just been prepared sort of to do away with a lot of the bureaucracy around that. I mean, those are aspects. I mean, there are generally friendly relations within the region. It's sort of, but making that big, bold jump, sort of to creating sort of as least friction as possible. And of course, and I will just sort of pause on that and I'll come back to it. And of course, and I'm not going to allow anyone to ask me a hard question about what's happened with Brexit and why we brought a little bit more friction. That is above my pay grade. Thank you.
Fair enough. We'll stay away from Brexit. Purvi, given the role of Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, I'd like to ask you to reflect a little bit on the world of foundations and philanthropy as having a role in both tackling climate change, but also agriculture and food systems. And in particular, what I feel is a comparative advantage of the philanthropy and foundations is to be innovative. You can take risks, you can invest in something that may or may not pay off, which FCDO won't be able to do unless they're guaranteed a result. They just simply won't be able to allocate resources for that. What do you think the comparative advantage of foundations, particularly your foundation, but others as well, might be, and how can we all join forces to use that comparative advantage?
Thank you. I want the audience to know that we were not given these questions earlier. So, no, thank you. I think there are comparative advantages and there are comparative disadvantages as well, right? When we see development sector, especially agriculture, especially food systems, especially now as we speak about climate and the countries becoming resilient to that or adapting to, and we are sitting in one of those countries which has invested heavily into bringing their rural poverty in 2000 about 49% to 2016, just in 10 years, they brought it down to 23%, and predominantly using agriculture, the farming system, and food system as the biggest lever. So philanthropies, the foundations, and international organizations a role, but I don't think the game changing that has to be the countries, and it continues to be the countries. So with that, I think the role that development organizations anywhere in the world, we are just one of them, and there are many, and that historically this world has had many very effective organizations. I think the role that they can play is a catalytic role in sort of optimizing the value that the country is already creating. We can only play a catalytic role, I don't think, more than that. And we can play that catalytic role only when we work in very close collaboration and by learning from the countries, rather than going and parachuting in and doing some standalone projects here and there and coming back. That has never been effective, and we know that from the history of development in the world, not just this region. One of the key advantages of that is the global outlook that international organizations bring, right? If something worked in Africa, is there some relevance to that? Say, for example, in Bangladesh, can we play that role in sort of bridging those learning gaps? And perhaps also many organizations can also play an agnostic role. They are neither private sector nor public sector. They are not associated with one government. So I think can play that agnostic role of bringing things together. But overall, we need to be very mindful, and we need to realize that we are only a catalytic role. The real work anyway at any given time is done only by the countries and its own people.
Thank you very much. Excellent observation and delineation of roles as well. Kamrul, I want to come to you now and identify from my side what I feel is another suboptimal area, which is Bangladesh's participation in the annual COPs. All right, we go with big delegations, we prepare big statements, and we go and represent ourselves, government and non-government, at these events, but we don't necessarily optimally get involved in the actual negotiations, which requires a lot of experience and skill, and you're one of those experienced negotiators. What do you think we need to do in terms of building the capacity of the Bangladeshi negotiators who go, particularly on this new area of agriculture and food, which is opening up now, as you just pointed out? What do we need to do to build capacities for our negotiators who go and participate in that, to be able to do that effectively going forward?
It's a very horny issue, and deep down in my heart, I feel that agriculture, food system, this is a new agenda item in UNFCCC process. And in the initial years, Dr. M. Asaduzzahman used to follow it on behalf of Bangladesh. And he is one of the finest agriculture economists, as you know, and a quality researcher, one of the very few we have in this country. Unfortunately, for last couple of years, he's not going. And at Glasgow, I asked a couple of our colleagues in the delegation to follow this agenda item, because I'm not agriculturist, and I have to follow a lot of agenda items, as you know, on behalf of LDCs, on behalf of G77 and China, many agenda items. So this is not my area. I used to encourage even Dr. Fazl Rabi Sadek. He followed one or things, but not the whole. So we need to take some, say, representatives from Agriculture, Ministry of Agriculture, even I think BARC, or even say Agriculture University or others, so that that agenda item is right honestly followed, because this agenda item will be at least for next couple of years one of the key areas where we should concentrate. Bangladesh has a interest, and interest of the least developed countries also. Coming back to the, say, raising the capacities of our negotiators. Yes, since Copenhagen COP 2009, we are sending big delegations, but hardly we follow right agenda items at the core negotiation, because as you know that in core negotiations, only few delegates decide the fate of 200 plus minus countries' interest. There at times, say, on specific agenda item on adaptation, say 10 to 12 negotiators in the middle of the night or early hours, they decide, they agree. If they agree, then it used to come in the plenary and endorse. Nobody speaks over there. Only one or two guys may intervene, but if those 12 negotiators agreed, then it is agreed. Or on finance, if 12 negotiators or 15 negotiators or 20 negotiators say for 10 days, nights, if they agree on certain issues, that is agreed by 200 countries. Say 20,000 or 30,000 delegates, they agree. Okay, so this is the process, and the process is like that. Only the representatives, delegates of least developed country, one or two, say G77, one or two or three maximum, environmental integrity group led by Switzerland, one or two, say umbrella group led by USA, Australia, Canada, one or two representatives, or say AOCs represented by one or two. These 10, 12, or 15, or at times 30 delegates, they decide. So we need to develop or nourish some, groom up some negotiators in Bangladesh who can be in those small groups, small rooms. But we send 200 people, at times 150 people, but one or two only figure in those negotiations, and once in a blue moon. So that phase we have to overcome and try to represent Bangladesh, try to represent LDCs, try to represent G77 and China, because at the end of the day, G77 and China decides what should be agreed on, what shouldn't. If G77 and China share doesn't agree, then it is not done. So to make it done and dusted, we need to have those kind of skilled, experienced, long-time negotiators. If we can groom up some young people who can, say, represent Bangladesh or LDCs or say G77 and China for years to come, even up till say 2050, 2040, we need to dream. We need to have that kind of negotiators who have tenacity, as say a prolific batsman like Navjot Singh Sidhu, or say Sachin Tendulkar, or say Imran Khan, fast bowler, like those kind of, or Maradona,
nurtured them,
Zico, Rummenigge, Socrates, those kind of players who can play at World 11, who can be figured in the world-class negotiation. We need to master that kind of, marshal that kind of, say, powerful
Capabilities.
negotiators who will be remembered by the mankind. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So just a comment for all of our agriculture and food people in the room. If you want to become a global negotiator, then come and talk to Kamrul afterwards and he'll give you good tips. But you have to focus and build your own capacity on this. It won't happen overnight. So I'm going to ask my last question to Zillur, and then I'll open it up to the floor. Let me mention again, if you want to ask a question, there are 2 microphones there. So please go to the microphone and I'll recognize you, and you can then make your comment or ask your question by first introducing yourself. So Zillur, I'd like to pose a question to you that I've wanted to do for some time now. Okay, you and I, we are both researchers, but you have had the, I will call it the privilege of also having a government decision-making position in the government. Based on that experience, my question to you is, what do you think are ways in which government and non-governmental actors in this context of climate change and food and agriculture, but more generally as well, how do we foster a more whole of society approach to tackling these kinds of major systemic problems who nobody can do on their own. Ministry of Agriculture on their own cannot do it. Even the Prime Minister alone cannot do it. She needs all of us to be involved in it. But how do we make that happen?
Well, I can't give the full answer here. I'll just try some. But I think Kamrul already pointed to, I think we researchers or academia or even non-government actors, even government actors, many, are, I think what Kamrul was hinting at, I was fully, and I was remembering as the commerce advisor, I had gone to this WTO ministerial, and I was the green room environment. For me, it was like I was actually attending it like a class. I mean, seeing it as how politics, issues, global power play, how do they play out? And in that context, if you want to become a player, how you need to position yourself, prepare yourself, etc., etc. I think one is, there is one issue where this is more of a conceptual issue, but I think it's very important. The boundaries are blurring. Development sector, private sector is blurring. Government, non-government boundaries are blurring. Though some government actors might like to see themselves as surrounded by walls, I think the world we are in, the boundaries are blurring. And that's for practical reasons. But it's not yet translated into knowledge ideas of how, in that sense, for example, an entity like BRAC, which is recognized as an NGO, but also has a very strong private sector presence. What does it mean? Does it mean that BRAC has become another private sector actor? Not necessarily. BRAC has carried over its social mission into its private sector sort of activities. So how these boundaries are blurring, we need a better understanding of that. I think that's a key issue. I think we are not, I mean, Kamrul has posed it in rather brutally honest terms. 200-member delegation, where is the output? As a whole, in the overall our process, I see that our focus on outputs is much less than on inputs. We're writing papers, etc. Where is the impact? Where is the output? Where is the value addition? A much clearer engagement on that is a very important concern. And I think that can give you a way to become a bigger player. Becoming a player is also an ambition we have to embrace. I mean, I'm not sure that that's an ambition we have embraced sufficiently. If you want to do that, and I would maybe extend Kamrul's point a little, that it's not just becoming a more efficient negotiator. Unless that negotiator is backed by a usable strategic knowledge, then your just simple technical negotiating capacity means nothing. You have to, those 4 or 5 people who determine, that's because of not just brutal power, it's also by their better understanding of how the knowledge thing works out, etc., etc. So I think as a whole, we have that knowledge part has to be addressed. I particularly feel that's why I want to really re-emphasize again that point of the macro-micro, strengthening the macro-micro knowledge connection related to climate change. And I would like to propose, since there is there is an opportunity here for Bangladesh to almost like a learning opportunity where multiple strategic agendas are coming together, where we can really develop some new way of talking new agenda. For example, southern Bangladesh. Coincidentally, southern Bangladesh, I'm in the, let's say, Chittagong part, let's exclude for the moment, has become the epicenter of the climate change impact.
Correct.
All right? So, but this time we also learned that we should not just consider Sylhet
and
never
surrounding
flood,
areas, yeah.
experienced flood.
Exactly.
And they don't have the resilience strategies developed by you to deal with floods. So it is going to impact everywhere. But southern Bangladesh, certainly salinity, everything else. So that's one meta agenda which is already operational there. Second, agriculture's new strategies, has been tried out in the eastern part in the 80s, 70s, 80s, later on in the northern part. Southern Bangladesh, in a way, remains the remaining agricultural frontier, in my mind, in which new, for example, salinity resistant, or where land is a more pressing constraint, how do you, think of production there, etc., etc. So a new agricultural frontier. And then Padma Bridge has opened the possibility of a economic regeneration of the South. Three meta agendas coming together: economic regeneration, climate change,
Right.
and also the agricultural frontier. So my proposal is that we should strategically think about a South conference, a South sort of knowledge, not a conference, knowledge conclave, where it will be a huge learning experience
Right.
of how these issues come together, and where we can then begin to, generate. It's a question of, not just self-confidence, but also new language, new way of looking at this issue. That's why I talked about the new rural. The rural is a completely new reality now.
Absolutely.
Do we understand it? How these things are changing? How the, as I said, the small farmers, how they are trying to strategize a future for themselves, and how external actors are also thinking about that. So, yeah, I see, I would recommend that let's all get together and organize a knowledge conclave in the South. And then maybe we'll not take over, sorry, we'll enter the high table of global
Of the
negotiations.
negotiators. Great. Thank you very much. So I hope our hosts in IFPRI are taking note. Zillur, and I add my offer to join forces. Let us make this happen. I think that's a very good outcome of this discussion. We have maybe about 15, 20 minutes left for an open floor discussion. If anybody would like to take the floor and share your thoughts, please go to the microphone if you don't mind. Introduce yourself, and then ask your question or your comment. Please. Oh, we have a roving mic. Please, go ahead, Shamim.
Thank you, sir. My name is Dr. Shamim from Bangladesh Meteorological Department, and I'm working as the head of the Agrometeorology Division. My question, especially for Dr. Surbi, you know that we are the operational people, but we have very less knowledge to develop a good development project proposal. As you know that my field is, there are a lot of scope to improve the agrometeorological service, decision support system for the farmer, improvement of the dissemination or response from the end user. There are a lot of things we can improve in the agrometeorology field. But is there any scope or from your organization to help the people for develop a good development project proposal? And number two, as you know that in government system, after project, we must have some SOP or standard operating procedure. So after immediate completion of the project, we should need to prepare the SOP, concrete SOP, otherwise it will not be sustainable. This is my last, thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Would you like to take the question on preparing proposals?
Thank you very much. I think the departments anyway are doing a really great job. One of the requirement there is to sort of build some kind of a common link with the data sets that is already available within the context of the entire system perspective that you also spoke about. Your kind of departments, for example, bringing in the agriculture data, bringing in the weather data, bringing in the water and irrigation data, all of that together. In many countries where we have support for this kind of work, we often work with organizations like IFPRI, for example, which has a lot of emphasis on data, which kind of helps the whole policy making process in the countries. So my suggestion would be for your kind of department to sort of have work in consortia with various organizations that can bring in various data and perhaps have a joint development of a program rather than department to department program. On the SOP, just one comment. I think one of the very big gaps in terms of climate and climate adaptation is our inability to really measure the adaptation impact, and that's one of the things that can be very important also for the negotiations, right? There is very little clarity on by countries on what is it going to cost me to do these kind of adaptation. And once we have that kind of clarity, I think it will, the countries can go with more numbers and more evidences on these negotiation tables.
Great, thank you very much. We have roving mics, so we have one over there. Can you bring another one here?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
In the front?
It is with me.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, sir. This is something related with the IPCC policy issues. That's why I am interested to react on this. The today's, the keynote presentation has brought a very unique thing. That paper said that the total food system emissions is 33%. And on the AFALU, the agriculture, forestry, and other land use, it's only 21%, the emission is coming. But in the third para, they have mentioned rightly that the AFALU has serious potential to become a net emission sink, pulling out, the more than greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere than it emits. That's the, the important point. And I belongs to International Rice Research Institute, and rice is, the very often is blamed to be, the emitter of methane especially, and from fertilizers and other use the CO2 also. But I mentioned in other different issues that actively rice growing plants in 1 hectare of land actually consume 5 tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere during the photosynthesis, and simultaneously it also releases oxygen to the atmosphere, which can combine with the hydrogen and make precipitation. So that is the the uniqueness of the rice plants. But recently, when I attended another workshop with the peoples of the environment department, and I found that they also considered that rice is the annual crop. Though rice also, we have a rice perennial crop, but rice in Bangladesh, it is now cultivated as a throughout the year. And in the IPCC, no annual crops, the carbon sink is considered. So that is the huge, the policy issues. Since you are, sir, representing IPCC many times, so I should take this opportunity to bring it to you that yes, rice is not only emitter, it's also the consuming carbon dioxide, and that type of the sink should be considered in the IPCC channel.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you very much. I'd be very interested to see the paper. We have somebody with the mic here. Can you bring it here, the other mic? Please go ahead. Introduce yourself and then make your comment or your question.
My name is Rishti. I work for BRAC. My question is for anyone who wants to take it up on the floor. So when Zillur sir was mentioning about the new rural, it is also essential that we also talk about the new kind of emerging consumer behavior in terms of food. So I've heard a lot from this panel about, what role the state needs to play, what role, let's say, civil society organizations and philanthropies need to play. But while we are living in this era of fast food, what role can private sector play in, really strengthening the conversations, the negotiations at a global stage on behalf of climate vulnerable countries like Bangladesh?
Great, thank you very much. Zilur, you want to take that? After all, BRAC is also a private sector
But
organization.
This will become a brag conversation. So I would suggest someone else.
I think the question is quite a prudent one. And as Dr. Hossein Zillur alluded us, that we should have a new food habit, new food habit, to not only cut back our emissions over there, but also to build our resilience, to also ensure food security and achieve sustainable development. Coming back to the question of, say, having good set of negotiators, as Dr. Hossein Zillur also pointed out, that it should be based on science. It should be based on knowledge. Knowledge endowment is a huge question to build the capacity of our negotiators. I still fondly remember that at Joburg in 2002 at WSSD, I was in a small room, and in the middle of the night, I took 2 minutes washroom break and rushed to Dr. Salimul Haq and asked him what is the implication of this particular paragraph and whether it has any problem or concern of our developing countries. So he said that it will do. And you, I think, remember that you suggested 2-3 alternatives formulation. And I went back there and inserted those 3 options over there. Even in Durban in 2010-11, Dr. Razaul Karim, one of our veterans, Dr. M. Asaduzaman, Dr. Ainun Nishar, and myself, we are in a room. At 5 o'clock in the morning, I went back to our hotel with the, say, draft text agreed among, say, 12 of the negotiators. And I asked Dr. M. Asaduzaman whether it has, and Dr. Razaul Karim, whether it has any, say, interest of least developed countries or Bangladesh be harmed. There also, Dr. M. Asaduzaman gave me a couple of alternative words, phrase. And next morning, my role was to ensure insertion of those few words. So that way, at Kyoto, in 1997, I asked Ambassador Dasgupta of India. He was not in that small room. So I came out of the room and grabbed him and asked him whether it has any implication for us. And he suggested 1 comma, and I inserted that comma over there. So that way, we need to build our capacities and also cover some knowledge gap, because this negotiation is very important for countries like Bangladesh, countries like South Asia. So IFPRI can have play a role, especially say raising the capacities of our negotiators from policy perspective, because some policy issues which have some implications in the negotiation, and from negotiation we have to also come back to our countries and implement those. So for implementation, we need some policy solutions, policy suggestions, policy recommendations, so that we can have some nature-based solutions. But nature-based, what does it mean? We need to demystify those phrases, those buzzwords. And for that also, we need some policy recommendations based on solid science, based on solid foundation of data, say BBS data, or say other countries in South Asia, we need to, or BIMSTEC countries, we need to collaborate. And also interministerial coordination, interagency coordination. Those are key concerns, challenges in the days ahead if we want to meet the challenges of climate change. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Zillur, you want to comment?
Just, I mean, since the food was mentioned, I think that's another issue, the behavioral space, aspirations are critical to understand. Otherwise, you won't get food behavioral changes, etc. So that's a fast food, for example. Should we in a blanket sense, put it as a evil? Fast food itself, for example, working poor, for them, fast food is a necessity maybe. So how do we make fast food itself more nutritious? One of the, I find in the streets of Dhaka, a quite, say, food habit transformation in the last 1 decade. A fruit like pineapple, which was difficult to cut and you have to take it. But now you have this, both a supply increase via hill tracks, and then you have a fast food version of the pineapple being short of, and you can even hold it and walk. While walking, you can munch it. These sort of behavioral changes, we need to understand how that is playing into the whole. And I think I would strongly urge that this discussion about food systems, I think you mentioned whole society approach, right? It's both whole society, also, other critical sectoral agendas also get linked. For example, I saw a study by the Food Safety Authority of Bangladesh, where they showed that we talk of, unsafe food, right? As soon as we hear the word unsafe food, we think of adulterated food.
Adulteration.
But that study was telling me the other, even bigger driver of unsafe food is unclean food, not adulterated food, but food prepared in unclean environments.
Right.
Kitchen markets in Dhaka city are one of the most polluted areas. Food prepared there will be. So the wash agenda becomes hygiene, becomes immediately connected to this. And through these are the connections which you need to build on to build a bigger sort of rationale why these agendas are so critical.
Absolutely. Everything's linked to everything else. Do you have the microphone? Very good. So you're going to have to get a microphone to be recognized, all right? So it's your responsibility to get hold of a microphone.
Okay,
Please,
I'll be brief.
go ahead.
I'll be brief. This is Wise Kobi from Agriculture Research Council. What I want to share with you that our rice scientists during 87 could sense the climate change, and they could hear the climate change bell and develop rice varieties for the southern coastal belt tolerant to salinity. Having said so, as Kamrul was saying, that there is also disconnect. with the global negotiation in climate change and mainstream R&D agencies. I think this is the right time for us to consider creating a core group in mainstream agriculture R&D institutions so that they can prepare their voices in organized way to share their views in global platform. That's my one point, and I appreciate Kamrul for raising this issue. Another one in this morning, this keynote speech, it was mentioned that 1% agricultural GDP should be invested in agricultural R&D. I do not think in South Asia a single country is investing even 0.5%. Except Malaysia, you won't find a single country in Southeast Asia investing in agriculture R&D, because we need to have enhanced capacity, skill, and institutional reform. For that matter, I think we need to create or reposition the agricultural research institutions to address the new set of challenges coming in. As mentioned this morning, this session, about the food wastage. So unless we convert volume to value in the total food system, we cannot really gain.
Excellent.
And I don't think the varieties or commodity varieties will solve the problem unless we develop practices those addresses the climate change issues. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much for those excellent suggestions. Who has the microphone? If you have the microphone, you have the floor. Please go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Dr. Mohammad Shajan Kabir, Director General, Bangladesh Rice Research Institute. Actually, I have no question. I have some comment, actually.
Sure.
What issues already raised. One issue, growth rate of rice production is declining. It is true. But I want to mention here, we already developed number of new varieties which have yield potentiality more than our popular variety, Bridan 28, 29, and BR 11. And we are going to develop further more varieties for the future. And we are going to disseminate, quick dissemination for create further momentum so that we can increase our rice production. And another is management. Management is different issue. And there what you mentioned, that is emission and other issue also here. But we are trying to practice good management for increasing our production. And also, our Prime Minister declared no inch land will remain fallow. And so we are trying to bring this fallow land under cultivation so that our production can boost up. Improvement. We are trying to improve our existing cropping pattern and include more crop so that our productivity can increase. Another is climate change or climate resilient issue. We already developed what Dr. Waskubisha already mentioned. We developed drought tolerant variety. We developed number of saline tolerant variety, submergence tolerant variety, cold tolerant variety, and we are going to release heat tolerant variety. So we then cope up the situation. Mitigation issue. We already developed low water requiring rice. Already developed. and
good.
also low input variety, that is low fertilizer requiring variety, low water requiring variety, and other low input variety. We are practicing alternate wetting and drying methods so that we can low emit and also low water. We also practicing urea displacement method so that so that we can minimize we can reducing volatility and
Thank
also
you.
minimize loss also. And another is we develop already for nutrition issue, already develop zinc enriched variety for our poor people, already iron enriched variety, also high protein enriched variety. You know, we are already we are actually 60 to 60% protein comes from rice, and we are trying to increase 70 to 75% protein.
Thank
And
you.
so that, and also zinc same. And emission issue, I would like to say we became we tried to I think Bangladesh, you know, we are chronic food deficit country. Now we are food surplus or almost, I think, some food sufficient country. It could not happen. Everybody should, I think, like that. It could not happen. Millions of people become food refugees and would create global crisis. But reality is that now we are showing that courage to sheltering 1.2 million Rohingyas. So when rice is our main food, so we have to think that
Thank you.
we are emitting,
Thank
but
you.
we are absorbing also.
Thank
but
you.
we are balancing.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
we should sit together and we should
Thank you.
speak with our language so that we
Thank
can
you.
minimize our gain.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you very much. We just have a few more minutes left, so I'll take one or two from the floor. Atik, you have the mic. If you can be brief, please.
I think the discussion, can you hear me?
Go ahead, yes.
The discussion has been going on quite well. We started with very technical sort of food, coming over to food security issues and food supply, people to food need, etc., which is fundamentally a major shift and generalized discussion affecting policy in a big way. So this is the right way to move. But much of the technical discussion at the global level, the one that Kamul was mentioning, is happening where the negotiators are mostly people like us, several of us, no more than 30, 40 people. But the technical people of the country do not get that opportunity. So what I'm suggesting or proposing is having a miniature discussion going on in the country before we go out, so that
Very good.
those who go there, they get
Prepared.
informed, and those who are in here get trained, understood, and how the negotiation proceeds.
Excellent.
So the next generation of negotiators are being produced in that way, who can really take the country forward. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Has anybody else got the microphone yet? You have to get a microphone. You don't get the microphone, then I'm not going to recognize you.
Thank you, sir. Sir, this is Dr. Mirza
Yes,
Mohammed
please.
Islam, Director General, Bangladesh Institute of Nuclear Agriculture, BINA. Sir, I have 2 points to my concern, only 2 points. First one is actually participation in COP from the Minister of Agriculture, like the Nurse Institute, like Agriculture Research Institute, and other extension institutes. It should be actually ensured. Otherwise, you know, while Mr. Kamrul mentioned that actually we need to actually have the, you know, role as in a marshal or, you know, a game changer. So in this such a way, actually we have to play in the COPs meeting. So our participation should be ensured. That's one thing. And second one is for the capacity building. You see the CG centers or the development partners or the donors, they invest only in the adaptation trial, in the action research, not in the investment for the basic research or in the, you know, the mainstream research. So that's why actually our scientists or the students, they go abroad, they trained up, and they never come back. But those who are in the country, those who are actually working for the country, they need to actually expertise and they need to train up through the support or financial support from the development institutes or donors or the CG partners. Thank you, sir.
Very good. Thank you very much. I'm going to take one last question from the young lady over there, and then we'll...
Samrudava from GAIN. So just a three things that has not been covered, I think. So it is very important to recognize the blue economy in the whole process of the agriculture, the whole food systems transformation. Number two is food system is a solution, it's a problem as well as you looked at the carbon emission, private sector and regional cooperation. Sir, if we do not agree in the negotiation table at South region, will not be strong enough to make a case. So that's
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent point. So before we conclude, I'm going to give each of the panelists 1 minute, and we'll do it in reverse order. So we'll start with Kamrul at that end. And my suggestion is for you to share one thought as a takeaway from the discussion today. What for yourself? Don't answer questions. We can do that over dinner. Just a thought out of all the discussion that you yourself would like to take forward. Kamrul?
My take will be, the message should be that we need to boost our research, the quality research, empirical studies, because that is the foundation of scientific knowledge, raising knowledge endowments. That will help not only our policymakers, but also our negotiators and our younger generations, our youths, our farmers, and raising the capacities of the journalists, media people, because at the end of the day, media is an instrument which should be used, and also education.
Right.
We need to invest on education, because education is the key that will unlock our, say, food system in a sustainable manner.
Thank you. Excellent. Zillur, one last thought.
Yeah. Expand your invitee list for events like this. Not just restricted to the technical, because as I want to emphasize again, unless you can bring a social lens to bear on these interlinkages, you will not come up with those larger. And one final thought is that in terms of Bangladesh seeing itself in the global arena, we have so far played a role as an LDC spokesperson, etc. Bangladesh is now graduated to a new role, which is the LMIC. I personally feel the LMICs there is a space out there in the global arena where an LMIC voice can be created, where a new set of issues can be highlighted.
Excellent. Well done. Purvi?
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and I think I'll build on that. As we, as developing countries of the region, we go to these global international negotiations and so forth. I think it's time we stop going there only as victims or beneficiary. There is a lot that these countries can offer to the world. For example, the way aggregations can be used, the way digitizations can be used, the way the farmers themselves have been using so many risk management techniques. So I think on the table, let's not just go to ask things. There is a lot that we can bring to the table also and negotiate at our equal positions.
Excellent. Well done, Purvi. Duncan?
Thank you. And I'll just build on that as well. I mean, that the thing that strikes me is how much that Bangladesh is a leader. It's got so much to sort of like to promote to the world, and how and where can it sit within a coherent and effective, particular South Asia group when it comes to sort of the negotiation. And perhaps the last point I will make is just, it's about the next generation. We need to see a lot younger people in a room like this, I mean, I think that this is sort of like quite critical, I think. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. So let me invite everybody to give our panelists a round of applause for an excellent discussion. Thank you. So before I conclude and hand over for the final organizational housekeeping and thanks, I hope our colleagues from IFPRI have been taking notes. You've got lots and lots of suggestions. I'm sure all of us in the room are interested to follow up with you. So we hope that these will be taken forward and not end here today. So with that, let me hand over to Shomi. You want to take over?
Thank you, panelists and audience, for sharing your perspectives and for enriching the discussions. I have a small announcement. Mr. Mohammad Ismail Hussain, NDC, Secretary for the Ministry of Food, is unable to attend today on account of a meeting at the Prime Minister's office. So the Secretary sends his regrets. With that being said, I would now like to invite Dr. Shomi Mustafa, Senior Research Coordinator, International Food Policy Research Institute, to give the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Nabila. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. A good get-together brings in people from different arenas, people with different thoughts, experience, aspirations, constraints, and hope. They communicate, discuss issues, answer questions, and raise them more, share experiences, and enrich everyone in the process. We focused on bringing in our guests and participants from different arenas, representing the government, development partners, and civil society, academics, researchers, activists, critics, and commentators from there. I'm happy to be standing here, about to give my thanks to everyone who came here and participated. Thank you. First of that I'll do so. Thank you. My first thanks go to our audience today. Thank you for your kindness, coming here, braving the traffic, and contributing, listening. Thank you. Next, I would like to thank our dignitaries who came for the inaugural session, and our chief guest, the Honorable Minister for Planning, the Secretary of Agriculture, His Excellency, the Secretary General of BIMSTEC, the SAARC, Director of Agriculture and Rural Development, IFPRI's Director of Environment and Production Technology, who gave today's keynote speech. Special thanks to him for waking up in the middle of the night for us. And as far as I know, he was up till now. The principal researcher at the International Water Management Institute, who presented the South Asia perspective, and of course, IFPRI's South Asia Director. Thank you. We just ended the plenary session, guided by the wonderful moderator. Distinguished panelists introduced us to new issues. My thanks to all of them. Thank you. Finally, I reserve my appreciation for our wonderful team in Dhaka, Delhi, and Washington, D.C., who worked extremely hard to pull this off. Congratulations and thank you all. Goodbye.
Thank you, Dr. Mustafa. I would like to request the panelists to remain on stage for photo op. And with that being said, thank you everyone for joining us today. May I now request everyone else to please join for dinner. Those who would like to offer Maghrib prayers, I know this is very late, but you're still welcome to do so and rejoin us for dinner. Good night, everyone, and I hope you've enjoyed your evening. Thank you. I would request the panelists to please remain on stage. The IFPRI team would like to take some pictures.
Who's the photographer?
Sorry? The dinner is being served outside. Yeah.